When they asked me to come speak, I thought I would give some reasons for optimism. Maybe this is just the historical view, because I'm very excited that copyright common sense is starting to be more common, and that fear of the future seems to be abating. You know, when I started my activism around publishing was back in the days when peer-to-peer file sharing had first appeared on the scene, and everybody was terrified. I wrote a paper called Piracy as Progressive Taxation and Other Thoughts on the Evolution of Online Distribution, which began with the message that obscurity is a far greater threat to authors and artists than piracy. And we've come a long way since then. But you know, this was a time, was very similar to 1982 when the VCR first came out, and Jack Valenti famously said, the VCR is to the American film producer and the American public as the Boston Strangler is to the woman home alone. You know, it's kind of unbelievable, but that same paranoia was besetting the music industry and then later the publishing industry. But we know what happened. You know, we actually saw that digital movie revenue, this was DVD, actually passed cinema in 2002. But what's interesting is that cinema didn't die. It came back. The total industry revenues grew. But of course, the industry is still complaining because you do have to be aware that regulatory capture means that you try to get as much as you can without regard for the truth. It's one of the problems in our politics. But I hope it's not a problem here in this room, because what we're looking for is the truth about the future of publishing. We're trying to figure out how to make the right futures happen. And you're here because you're interested in figuring out what works. So when I launched TOC, it was because I thought that publishing needed to start to move to the future. And there were a number of areas that O'Reilly took a leadership position. We've been working actually on ebooks, believe it or not, since the mid-1980s. And we've seen a long curve of acceptance to where they are today. I loved seeing this in Forbes earlier. Is piracy the new advertising? Exactly that point that I had made back in 2002 when I wrote that earlier paper. So we're getting a long way. But what's really interesting, too, is that we saw this was the year that ebook revenues actually passed hardcover, becoming really meaningful for a lot of publishers, something that we had seen coming. But what's also very interesting is that even print books haven't gone away. This is a chart showing BookScan year over year. Now, I haven't followed the overall BookScan numbers, but we have a chart going back to something like 2005 that showed our industry, computer books, falling year after year after year, every year since 2005. And this is actually the first year that we're not actually substantially below last year. In fact, we're ahead of last year. So it looks like the industry may be coming to some kind of equilibrium, as it always seems to do. And you know, that fear that everybody had that the new thing was going to be a bad thing is going away. And I think that fear is almost always misplaced. You know, yes, there are terrible things that happen to people, to the world, to industries, but they're usually not as bad as we imagine. And that's because innovators end up in the driver's seat. You know, the future happens because there are people who aren't afraid of it, who are willing to go and try to make interesting things happen. I want to tell you a story about a particular innovator. And this story starts with a conference, not about publishing, but about video, called VidCon. I went down to it last year, and I was kind of blown away because it felt like watching the Beatles in 1964. This is the line of screaming girls there to see Charlie McDonnell, a young British YouTube star. The keynote for this event was 2 hours of YouTube stars coming out and doing their shtick for 5 minutes, and each one was greeted by thousands of screaming fans. And I thought, wow, what amazing energy. But what was really interesting in relation to publishing was not just that energy of enthusiastic fans, which we also have in publishing, but the fact that all the creators are self-published. We're starting to see the emergence of publishers, studios on YouTube, but it's really this fan phenomenon. And as you know, we're starting to see that same thing happening in publishing. But what's perhaps particularly interesting is that the creator of this conference is a guy named John Green, along with his brother Hank. And John is also a best-selling author, a young adult author. After going to the conference, I read his book, Looking for Alaska. What's really striking is just how many reviews it has. I think this is I can't read it from here, but 112,000 ratings and something like 12,000 reviews. His current book, even more striking. Fantastic, about 115,000 ratings and almost 25,000 reviews on Goodreads. And according to the New York Times, the book has sold about 950,000 copies. It means 15% of all the people who bought it have actually rated it on Goodreads. That's an astonishing story about how people still love reading, they still love books, they still love authors, they're sharing with each other, and that there are new forms of discovery. There's been this drumbeat of fear that, oh my God, when the bookstore goes away, or if the bookstore goes away, people won't discover books anymore. And it just isn't true. There are new methods of discovery, and there are people who know how to use them. There are authors who know how to build a community online, and there are publishers who know how to build a community online for authors who don't necessarily know how to do that for themselves or don't have time or inclination to do that. And so there are opportunities that are becoming clear to those of us who are not afraid of the future but are trying to figure it out. And for those of you who are afraid of Amazon, it's worth noting that the number of reviews on Goodreads is about 10 times the number of reviews of the same book on Amazon. So the fans are actually looking like they may well be in charge, not even the big retailers. Perhaps even more striking, Hank and John, the brothers, who I think they have about 1 million people who follow their YouTube channel, also put together a variety show, and they recently sold out Carnegie Hall here in New York and then went on to tour in Europe. That's a hell of an author tour. These guys have figured out the new medium. And it's really interesting for those of you in publishing to realize that they are cross-media stars. And, Hank is kind of more the YouTube heart of the team, and John is the author. But they have worked together to build this massive online presence, this show. Hank is a musician, John is an author. They mix together, they bring in surprise guests. They have an amazing thing going. And it's interesting, if you're a publisher and all you think about is books and ebooks, you may be missing something, because this footprint that you need to have online is bigger than just being about the book. You may notice that O'Reilly is in the publishing business, the conference business, the venture capital business, because we understand that what our job is, the thing that we actually do, is to help promote the people and the technologies that we're involved with, not just focus on a narrow single type of business. We have a much bigger idea. And John said this recently in the New York Times article that talked about the Carnegie Hall sellout. He said, "For me, there is no bright line between publishing and making stuff on the internet. They're both about collaborating with others to make something new." This is a refrain that you will hear again and again. It's about engaging. It's about creating. And that, to me, is the biggest reason, ultimately, for optimism. People worry about business models. People worry about the survival of their business. But readers are doing fine. Writers are doing fine. And I love this recent blog post, both for the headline, but also for this picture from an unconference, which says, "What should we be talking about instead of all the stuff we always talk about?" And when I think about what we should be talking about is why we are here. Why do authors write? Why do publishers do what we do? It's not to make our fortune. You know, there are certainly people who've forgotten that. But I like to say that making money is like putting gas in the car. You know you need to do it, but your life is not a tour of gas stations. And so we have to remember what publishing is really about, what writing is really about. I started writing books and then publishing them for other people because there were problems I wanted to solve. And, you know, we still have a job to do. And that job is to educate, to entertain, to figure out how to gather the knowledge of the world and share it with other people. And so I was really struck, again, back to YouTube. There was an article recently in the Atlantic that said, you know, how YouTube became our storehouse of folk knowledge. And it describes the author looking for instructions for how to light the pilot of a particular model of water heater. You know, he found the instructions online, he couldn't read them, but there was some guy who had made a detailed video. Now, why did he do it? You know, make a video of how you light the pilot light on this particular model of water heater. He did it because he could, because he cared, because he wanted to share knowledge. And that's why platforms are vibrant. You know, when people started publishing, it was because it was a burning, burning idea that they wanted to get out. You know, books mattered, ideas mattered, writing mattered, and they still matter. And if you make that the heart of your practice as a publisher, if you make that the heart of your practice as an author, you will succeed, because it is not about how much money you make. It's about what kind of difference you make. And that's why, whether I'm speaking to technologists or whether I'm speaking to publishers and authors, my message to you is this, is to work on stuff that matters. Thank you.